Hey, y'all, welcome to Cross Politic. It's YouTube Live. Good to be with you guys. Of course, Pastor Toby and Chuck Knox, I kicked them out for this session. Make sure we're going to be talking about PCA, General Assembly politics. I know this is church politics, but this is still stuff that you should be aware of. Just like Southern Baptist Convention, same goes the PCA, okay? So pay attention to this show. But before we get there, download the app. Go to any of your favorite app stores, download the app, Fight, Laugh, Feast app, and download the app so you can get a little more exclusive experience with us and what's going on. Of course, join the club as you guys support us. We really appreciate your support. Make sure you go to fightlaughfeast.com, click on shop, and then you can join the club. You can come to our conference in Knoxville, Tennessee, October 6th through the 8th, and subscribe to our magazine. So do all that here on YouTube Live. We really appreciate that. I have Scott Hedgecock. Scott Hedgecock annually comes in. This is becoming kind of an annual tradition where he annually comes in and kind of gives us an update on the PCA General Assembly. For those of you who know or don't know, I actually grew up in the Presbyterian Church, PCA denomination. I was there really probably starting from like 82, 83, maybe 84, and then was at a PCA church in Texas. I was at a PCA church in New Mexico, and I was at a PCA church in Oregon. And so the PCA was actually means a lot to me just in terms of my faith and God using the PCA to seed my faith and to encourage me and to keep me from backsliding in a lot of ways. So I really appreciate the PCA denomination. It catechized me. It kind of gave me my Reformed roots. And so the PCA is near and dear to my heart and everything. So Scott, welcome to the show, man. Appreciate you coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Gabe. Good to be here. Glad to be in town and get to be with you.
Yeah, and you're actually an elder at a PCA church in Seattle area.
Yeah, we're just outside of Seattle in Bothell, Washington, and it's called Trinitas Presbyterian Church. We planted it back in 2013.
Okay, and who's your pastor at Trinitas?
Reverend Dr. Brant Bosserman.
Okay, Reverend Doctor.
Yeah, Reverend
Brant.
Doctor. He got his PhD. We actually went to Bible college together.
Oh, did you?
At an AG Bible college, and we became Reformed.
No way.
Yeah.
Wow.
Pretty crazy story.
And then where did he end up going to seminary?
So he went to, he didn't want to leave Seattle, so he actually went to Fuller. And then he went and got, and then he went
It's a tough one.
Yeah. And then he went and got a PhD in the UK.
Okay.
So he's actually a Van Til scholar.
So he left Seattle to go to UK, but not for like a real seminary.
Yeah. He just went and got a PhD, but he's a Van Til scholar. So definitely, even though he went to Fuller, definitely Reformed guy.
Yeah. And is he been is he the founding pastor 2013 or whatever? Okay.
Yeah, it was he and I for the first two people in the church.
No way.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome, man. And how many people you guys have now?
Right now, if everybody showed up, we'd have about 150.
Okay.
Yeah. So, that's pretty good growth for a small Reformed church in the Seattle area, starting from zero. Or I guess
two families.
Two of us. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Now, how many elders do you guys have now?
So currently we have 4 ruling elders and 1 teaching elder.
Okay. So, Cross Politic's been around since 2016. We've gotten into PCA politics and fights here and there. Of course, everyone knows the PCA, particularly knows us for our conversation, our interview with Greg Johnson.
Classic.
Classic. That was 2018. I can't tell you. Pretty much every pastor I talked to in the PCA, I got a lot of pops. This mic is hot. A lot of pastors that I talked to in the PCA, everyone's listened to it, the Greg Johnson interview. And it's kind of one of those scabs that seem to just be kind of not going away, not healing in the PCA. And so every year for political politics or PCA politics, there's a general assembly every year.
Yep.
Is that correct? Every year, every summer. Whereas the Southern Baptist Convention, there's a convention, I think, every 2 years. So there's a little difference there. So every year there's a general assembly. And last year, the General Assembly really had mixed results. Wasn't as positive as I think as this General Assembly was. I followed it. I texted a bunch of my friends while they were down there asking what was going on, how are the conversations going and everything. But it seems like to be, a little more positive results just in terms of kind of like some of the battles, some of the conservative battles that we'd like to see won. Just maybe giving you kind of your initial kind of summary of the PCA General Assembly this year.
Sure, yeah. Well, I would say this. I love going to General Assembly because as a guy from the Pacific Northwest, which is not the most conservative of areas to be in the PCA, it reminds me that I'm in the right denomination. Yeah. So you get down there with all your Southern brethren, and it's just a different experience.
This is home.
The cool thing is honestly, like the first night just to be there and just be part of worship.
Mm-hmm.
You've got maybe 4,000 people there singing, hymns and songs and just together. So that was great just to open it. But yeah, I think there's definitely been, I would say, a resurgence of interest in getting involved in polity. So record number of elders attending, record numbers of ruling elders attending.
Wow. This is in Alabama.
It was in Alabama.
Yeah.
Birmingham, Alabama. And so when you think about what does it mean to have ruling elders who, like myself, people who have,
you aren't a pastor, you're a ruling elder, and you have a vote at the General Assembly. Yep.
As a delegate from the church, I have a vote. Mm-hmm. And I would say overwhelmingly, we tend to be more conservative when ruling elders show up. So from my view, that's a good thing when you have a lot of ruling elder participation. I think that's what's driving some of the recent, I would say, I don't want to say backlash or resurgence. I think that's what's been driving it. And and I think, to your point, what you're getting is where you're getting at with the elder you mentioned, Pastor Greg Johnson.
Mm-hmm. Not just an elder, he's a pastor.
Yeah, exactly. I think, the positions he staked out and the response to it has really been a gift to the conservative movement in the PCA, because it's really galvanized the conservatives to come out and show up, because he's caused concern with many of the things he said, and I think rightly caused concern. Yeah. And so there's been responses to that.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, while I'm encouraged by that, I'm also part of the problem I think conservatives had, and this really started in, I think, the 50s, 60s in general conservative politics, where conservatism kind of galvanized around what we're against.
Yeah.
So when a guy like Greg Johnson comes out, it's like, oh, we're against that. And so we start getting energetic and start coming out and start getting involved, all that stuff. But we can't seem to push for and galvanize what we're for, which is why I think denominations like the PCA kind of end up in this cycle. Every 30 years, basically, you have a liberal fight, or every 40 years, whatever. Actually, be about 50 years, close to 50 years.
Yeah, next year will be the 50th General Assembly.
There you go. Yeah. There you go. Where you have this fight, and it's over some form of liberalism, whether it's inerrancy of Scripture, whether it's Greg Johnson, and can I identify as a homosexual while not participating in the sin of homosexuality and still be a pastor? Basically, is the decision. So I think conservatives moving forward, they need to figure out how to galvanize what they're for and not just what they're against, because or they're just going to get in this cyclical problem.
Yeah, I think it also begs the question of how large can a denomination be?
Yeah,
there's roughly speaking, about 400,000 communicant members in the PCA.
Mm-hmm. Has that declined or increased?
It's grown. Yeah, it's grown. Yeah. We're actually right now we're about, in terms of communicant members, the size that the PCUS, which later became the PCUSA, was when we split off of them.
Right. Wow.
Which was 50 years ago. So we're almost back to that level.
To what the split was.
The split was. Yeah. And obviously they've been declining.
Yeah. Forever.
So at some point here we'll pass them and they'll just go away.
Yeah.
But it begs the question. So what's the breadth of a denomination going to be? And I think that's really what happened to this GA. I think it's pretty clear who's driving the bus, and that is we call it the conservative, the confessional side. I mean, whatever. I mean, the terms are difficult because
the Orthodox side,
because and to be fair to my brethren in the PCA that disagree with me, I mean, these are all men that they affirm inerrancy.
They're Orthodox. Yeah,
they're Orthodox. They affirm male only eldership. I mean, there's a lot of.
There's some that don't. There's some that don't.
Well,
but I understand.
Yes,
but majority.
In checking the box, they have to.
Yeah.
Now they might have advisors on their session that are female. That's a whole nother thing we're dealing with. But but by and large, I think most of the guys that I know are pretty faithful. But there's some big disagreements.
Yeah. So I'm like I said, I'm encouraged about this last GA, and we'll get more into those details here in a minute. But I want to say the other thing is, the other thing that makes me nervous about the PCA. I have a friend who's a pastor down in South Texas, deep South Texas, by the border down there. Where Texas kind of really gets deep, So when he came up for ordination, there's 7 other pastors with him that are 6 or 7 other pastors with him, and he was the only pastor that did not take exception to 6-day creation. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, I think I know in the southern churches that's probably less common to take that exception. I can't remember the last guy who came into our presbytery that didn't take that exception.
That didn't. You mean basically everyone comes in and takes that exception
to some degree or another. Yeah.
And I think to me, the whole 6-day creation thing is like that. If you can't get Genesis 1 and 2 correct, you're already going liberal. You already what makes you able to maintain that Genesis is some sort of historical, poetry or something, and then not maintain that Christ is some sort of historical poetry?
Yeah, I mean, they certainly have to affirm that Adam was a historical person.
Yeah,
they have to affirm that. But I share the same concern, and I'm on the credentials committee for our Presbyterian, so it comes up. It's an issue, and I definitely push guys on it. But I'm just one vote.
Yeah, so. on the whole thing. Okay, let's get into the PCA General Assembly. What were the I think you got some notes. I got some notes. Camden, he texted me about his notes and everything. What's your what were some of the big issues on the docket, and then how did they rule? How did they shake out?
Yeah, well, I'd say the most notable one to start with. There's actually more notable ones in terms of controversies, but it's interesting. We actually, and this was, I think this was unanimous. I don't think either in the Overtures Committee, which is kind of the ones that brings motions to the floor, or in the actual assembly, nobody voted against this, which was good. Was we petitioned the U.S. government to end abortion on Thursday, and then on Friday, Roe versus Wade was overturned.
Praise
so
God.
apparently, the PCA had just gotten on it 40 years
a long time ago. It would have ended. God would have blessed it. Yeah.
So that was good.
Presbyterian revolt worked again.
Yes, it worked again. So
that's interesting. I didn't know about that. That was on the
we
docket,
did, and there was some debate more around perfecting the language, like to whom would we would address it, but there was really no debate on that. So I think that was a good affirmation in my mind, walking away that there might be an individual here or there, but when it comes to the leadership of the PCA, there's no question about our stance on human
pro-life. That's great.
Yeah. So that was good to affirm. Another thing that came up was we voted, and it was a pretty overwhelming vote, and this has been brewing for about 10 years, was we actually voted to leave the National Association of Evangelicals.
I heard about that. Yeah.
So the final vote on that was 1,030 to 699. So pretty overwhelming vote. I remember that vote in 2019. It failed. I actually spoke from the floor for it, and we lost that vote. So
why is that such a big deal, leaving that association?
Well, I think for us as being Reformed, the PCA has historically been sort of a merging of the evangelical and the Reformed.
Yeah.
I mean, I think evangelical world and the Reformed world coming together. Yeah. I just think the general downgrade that's gone on in evangelicalism has been a problem within the PCA. Even to some of these issues we'll get into a little bit later. I think it's more from that evangelical stream of the PCA and not the Reformed stream.
Yeah.
So we were the only Reformed church that was in that. And, maybe in the 1980s when we got in and Ronald Reagan was president, and, just the culture was different. Maybe it made a little more sense then.
Yeah.
But when you look at what the NAE has been lobbying for lately, and using our money to do it, there's been things that I just think most PCA guys don't want.
What's some examples?
Well, some of the examples of immigration reform that I don't think would be unanimously accepted. They've taken positions on global warming, climate, how to respond to climate crisis, those things. Yeah. I just think they've staked out a number of positions that are popular within the culture, but don't resonate within what I'd say your typical Reformed person with a Reformed Christian worldview.
And so the PCA was part of that because that was kind of like their ecumenical way of trying to partner with other associations or denominations or whatever.
And being a lobbying group. And it was interesting because I think they were both, and again, you have a spectrum in the PCA. Don't get me wrong. We don't have real, I don't know, liberals. We have our own liberals, which they're probably more conservative than your average conservative in the in the
they
culture.
Still pro-life,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
But we had people, I would say, from sort of both sides that didn't want them lobbying on a host of issues. So we just basically were saying we don't need the National Association of Evangelicals lobbying for us.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. What else?
So
next on the list.
Yeah, there were really three things that came up that were really dealing with the whole Greg Johnson situation, and really it's bigger than Greg. It's the whole side B gay Christianity.
Sexuality,
side B gay Christianity movement. So,
real quick for our viewers who don't know, what is the side B sexuality movement?
So side B, I think, would be well encapsulated by what happened. I think it was back in 2018 at the Revoice conference.
Yeah.
So Revoice was a movement. It wasn't necessarily PCA. It was hosted by a PCA church. and it was
in St. Louis, Missouri.
In St. Louis, Missouri, and Reverend Greg Johnson was part of that. And so there were people who were from the PCA. So it was seen as an issue. It definitely is an issue that impacts the PCA. But basically their idea was we need to revoice or re-explain, re-talk about the way we approach homosexuality.
Redefine, really.
Yeah. And so for them, I think to put it in the best light I can in terms of how would they explain it if they were here. I think what they would say is, the church has done tremendous harm in not just what we've believed, but how we've believed it, how we've expressed it. And so we're going to redo that. So I think they think that by re-explaining how to deal with these issues of sexual immorality, particularly the whole LGBTQIA++, whatever, the whole alphabet soup, if we could talk about it differently, we would have more traction and be more winsome with people. And I think most people will say, well, hey, we can always rethink the way we talk about things. But I think where they start to go over the line is the willingness to want to identify and to have somebody say, I'm a gay Christian, but I'm celibate. Therefore, they're sort of downgrading the sinfulness of the inclination and putting the sinfulness back onto the action. And I think ultimately it's a cultural problem. It's a church problem, but ultimately it's a theological problem. And there's this whole idea of the sin of concupiscence. This is a very deep theological topic to get into, but really I think it comes down to what's sin. Is sin both what's conceived inside of you and goes on inside of your mind and your temptation, or only what comes out of you? And historically, the Reformed answer would be it's all of it. In Adam, we were born sin. And so if we have an inclination towards something sinful, we should not identify with that.
You don't turn that sin into a noun.
Right. So at the heart of it, I think that's what it is. To put it in the best light from their perspective, I think they're trying to kind of come alongside and maybe empathize with people and say, well, I can identify that way with you too, but here's a better way to live it out. Don't go get married to a man if you're a man and live that life. Come, live this Christian life. But I think it's very confusing at best, and I think it has just a number of theological deficiencies to it.
So what were the three issues that surrounded Greg Johnson?
Well, the three issues, and this isn't necessarily in order which they came up, but it's just I have a summary here and it's how it's written down. So the first one was how do we deal with these cases as the General Assembly? So real quick, church polity in the PCA. You have your local church; they kind of have the most authority. Then you have the Presbyterian; they kind of have second most. And then the one with the least authority is a General Assembly. So the lower courts, and each of those, your Presbyterian, your church, your Presbyterian, and the General Assembly, they're all courts. So they'll have to make judgments. That's the sense in which they're a court. Well, because the lower courts have so much power, there's really no ability for a higher court to take original jurisdiction or oversee a matter to make a judgment. All they can do is review the process that an underlying court went through. And so the General Assembly for a few years now, since Greg came out and said what he said in 2019 and talked about his...
really 2018 on our show. Yeah, on the show, really. But he did get the cover spread on Christianity Today in 2019.
Right, and in 2019, he talked about it at General Assembly.
Oh, that's right.
And actually, it was when we were speaking about the Nashville Statement. I was the speaker for the Nashville Statement directly in front of Greg. So as I was walking back to my seat, I heard Greg get up and give his spiel, which then he got a standing ovation, and it kind of set the whole world on fire in the PCA. But there's really no way currently to do anything about what his presbytery has done to review it other than the process. So we actually changed that so that now if it passed the General Assembly, now it has to pass 2/3 of the presbyteries. But basically now if this passes, the General Assembly itself could assume original jurisdiction if a presbytery fails to indict a man. So if we think that if the General Assembly, if we say, well, whoever, not even about Greg Johnson, but about anyone, we think this man has a problem, is teaching incorrectly, is behaving, whatever. If we think there's a problem, we're going to be able to get 10 presbyteries together to have the GA assume original jurisdiction, which is huge. Because then it moves it from that.
It just allows for appeals process, basically.
Exactly. Now, the downside of that, I'll bring up another case that your listeners may or may not be familiar with, is that it works both ways because our presbytery put Peter Leithart on trial for federal vision theology and acquitted him. And the General Assembly wanted to go after him and wanted to prosecute him, but they couldn't. So it can, sometimes giving the General Assembly more power can be good. Sometimes it can be bad. So we'll see what the long run this is. But in the immediate term with these issues we're facing, it seems to be a positive development for people saying, why isn't the PCA doing something about these issues? Well, we're trying to structurally set it up so we can.
Because the Missouri Presbytery failed to do anything about Greg Johnson.
So they've looked into the matter.
I know.
Yep. And
I know pastors. Jeff Myers in that denomination. He was the chair.
Yeah. There's been no indictment.
Yeah.
So, so the GA is powerless at this point.
Yeah.
But going forward, and it's not just about
now,
Greg.
Isn't the GA's powerless? But all pastors, they're members of the presbytery.
Yes.
They're members of the denomination, not members of the local church.
Right.
So how are they powerless with Greg? I mean, if Greg is identifying as a homosexual, then it's like, no, you're off you can't.
Because his presbytery hasn't indicted him.
Uh-huh.
And so basically the lower court, in that case, the presbytery has more authority than the General Assembly.
Yeah.
Hence the need, or I'm not going to just say it's just about Greg, but in these sorts of situations, the need for the General Assembly to have more authority.
Right.
This was a controversial vote. This was not a unanimous vote by any stretch, for many reasons, not just because people were trying to defend Greg.
Okay, so does that change go in effect, or does it got to wait till next General Assembly to finalize?
So now it's kind of like amending the Constitution. 2/3 of states have to ratify it. Now we got to get 2/3 of presbyteries to ratify it.
And so it waits a whole year to kind of get ratified.
Wait a whole year, and then we'll vote on it again at the next General Assembly if it gets ratified. Okay. Yep. So that was a big one. I mean, that's kind of inside baseball, PCA, like kind of nerding out on polity.
Right.
But it's actually really important because it deals with how do we as a denomination deal with problems.
Yeah.
So I think it's super important. So that was one. The most, I'd say, plain spoken one, and probably the one that was most controversial, was Overture 15. And so I'll give you a little background on that.
Yeah.
Basically, an overture is when you either asked the denomination to say something or to do something. Okay. In this case, with Overture 15, it was to amend our Book of Church Order. Okay. So amend the rules by which we elect and maintain elders.
Right.
So basically, we added to BCO 7.4 an amendment that reads thus. It says, men who describe themselves as homosexual, even those who describe themselves as homosexual and claim to practice celibacy by refraining from homosexual conduct, are disqualified from holding office in the Presbyterian Church in America. So that passed 55% to 45%. And if that seems low, I'll tell you, it's not actually that low when it comes to the central question.
Yeah.
Part of it is putting it in BCO 7.4 was a really weird place to put it.
Yeah.
BCO 7 does not say anything about the qualifications of a man to be an elder. Okay. It's the only thing in there that deals with qualifications. More normally, it would be in BCO chapter 16, which does deal with qualifications.
Okay. So why?
I have no idea why it ended up there.
Yeah.
Our pastor was on the overtures committee that perfected it. So they were the ones that were going through and doing it. Here's my theory. I think that's how it came up from the presbytery that suggested it. And I think that by getting into the BCO, once it's in there, because it has to go through that same process, General Assembly votes on it.
Yep.
2/3 of presbyteries ratify it. General Assembly votes on it again. Once it's in there, if we want to move it to a different place in the BCO, a place where it does belong, like 16, we can do that without having to go through that whole rigmarole. Yeah. So I think the thought was keep it simple.
Yeah.
Don't confuse people.
Right.
You got 2,000 plus people voting on something.
Right.
We're not going to argue about where it is in the BCO. We just want it in there.
Right.
And then we'll perfect it later.
Yeah. Okay.
But
and so how did that vote take place?
That vote was it was 55-45, so 55% voted for it, 45 against.
Yep.
I'd say the highlight of that was there was a lot of back and forth between the sides, and brother stood up, father in the faith, a guy named O. Palmer Robertson. Gets up, and this has been on YouTube. You probably share it, but he gives he had his 5 minutes to speak to it. He gave an epic defense of why we needed it, and after he got done speaking, he's been a missionary in Africa for years. He's written books, Christ of the Covenants. He's a longtime faithful guy. Probably, I don't know, maybe he's in his 80s, 70s, 80s. I mean, I'm not sure, but just gravitas. I mean, you could hear like a pin drop across the assembly. And I feel like if he hadn't gotten up and spoken that way, I don't know that it would have passed. But he had such perspective and such wisdom that you just look at as a younger elder there. You're just like, I want to be that guy someday.
Wow.
I want to be the guy that's been faithful to my church, that stands up and just reminds us of basically the question is, why are we talking about this? Because this is all the culture talks about.
Right.
And why did we have to clarify the Trinity against Arianism, or sorry, not just the Trinity, but the essence of Christ against Arianism, because that was the heresy of the day.
That's right.
And when the culture spits heresy at you, and you have to address it. People say, why is this all we're talking about? Well, because there's no pro-alcoholic parades out there, right? There's no one in schools today trying to teach our kids that they should go out and be alcoholics.
Right.
This is a cultural moment, and our faith has to speak to the culture.
Right.
And that, I think, was the big dividing line between a lot of people. It was like, well, why are we picking on this thing? Like, well, we're not picking on it. We're responding to something that's a real issue.
So 55 to 45, it's an overture. Again, does that wait a whole year and then you got to get 2/3?
Same process.
Oh,
yeah.
What does it look like? What do you think is going to happen there?
So we had two similar overtures.
55, 45, that's not 2/3.
No. And so it's a very different makeup. It's kind of like, think of General Assembly as like the U.S. Congress.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then think of the presbyteries as the 50 state legislatures.
Okay.
Right.
So now it goes before legislators?
Now it's got to go before all those state legislatures, basically, in terms of our polity. So I think it probably doesn't pass.
Okay.
I think it gets close to 2/3, just like we had two similar overtures last year that didn't.
Yep.
But I think here's the message from the, let's call it the conservative confessional side. The message is, we're not giving up.
Yeah.
You want to vote these down? Great. We'll just do another overture next year.
Yeah.
We're just going to keep doing overtures until they pass. It took us 10 years to get out of the National Association of Evangelicals.
Yeah, right.
Might take us 10 years.
Yeah.
But we will get there.
Right.
And it's a message to the folks that don't like it.
Yep.
It's like, well, we're not stopping.
Yeah.
You voted it down? Okay, we'll just come back with another one next year.
We got a plan. Yep. Okay. Well, last one on the list there.
The last one, which was very similar to the ones we that we did last year, basically talks about it was an amendment to our standards of what does a man have to be, confess, and do to be an ordained elder in the PCA.
Yep.
And so this is a very lengthy one, but I'll just summarize the crux of it, which is, while office bearers will see spiritual perfection only in glory, they will continue in this life to confess and to mortify remaining sins in light of God's work of progressive sanctification. Therefore, to be qualified for office, they must affirm the sinfulness of fallen desires, the reality and hope of progressive sanctification, and be committed to the Spirit-empowered victory over their sinful temptations, inclinations, and actions.
Yeah.
So it doesn't specifically name any particular sin.
Or side B sexuality. Yeah.
But I think it's getting at that, because one of the claims that's very common amongst the side B crowd is these sinful inclinations, they can never go away.
Yeah.
And we would actually say from our side, this is one of the problems, is that you're giving up the hope of progressive sanctification on a particular sin.
Yeah.
We wouldn't say that to anyone else. We wouldn't say to an adulterer, hey, you're just going to be this way the rest of your life.
Right.
We would have hope that they would overcome it, even in their inclinations in their heart.
Right.
And so what we're doing is, if a man won't confess that, if he won't have that for every sin, then he's not qualified to be a pastor in the PCA.
Yeah. That's really good. It's crazy to be even having that conversation. What's your take? It seems like the PCA, I'm more encouraged than I have been in the past with the PCA. But you still got guys like Tim Keller and his church is in there, and Scott Sauls and his church is in there, and really these kind of softer PCA churches in there. Where's General Assembly going to be next year?
Next year will be Memphis. Yeah, so you'll probably see very similar turnout and outcome.
Alabama.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that helps. It's like the Southern Baptist Convention was in California, and it really hurt the conservative cause because it was in Cali. I mean, it really did. It changed everything.
Yep.
So what's your take kind of on the future of the PCA? Because it seems like really what happened this year was good, but it's really what happens next year with the overtures in legislative session, where it's like, okay, if that happens, then I can see some real cleaning house happening, or some people just self-selecting and leaving the denomination.
Yeah. I think it's already started to happen.
Okay.
There's I can speak to a number of people, number of churches, even in our presbytery, that have left. They've gone to be part of the Anglican church. And that's largely over, will we ordain women as deacons or not? Because the PCA won't.
Mm-hmm.
There's people who try to get around that. And when they've had a little bit of pressure applied to them in terms of, you need to explain yourself here, they just, even when they win the vote, they still leave. So that's been interesting. So I think what's more likely to happen is people self-selecting out.
Yeah.
Just because they feel like, look, the PCA, again, it's a big tent Reformed denomination. Insofar as that makes any sense that we're Big Tent, right?
Yeah.
We're a very small slice of American culture.
Yeah.
But in terms of Reformed culture, we're maybe one of the broader cultures.
Just need to get that Amill problem figured out. That's it.
Well, and so I think what's going to happen is we will continue to have a variation of viewpoints.
Yeah.
Right. And so then it comes down to, on the conservative side, who are we willing, for the sake of the gospel, be in one church with? Even though I might look at a guy and say, that guy would never be on my session.
Yep.
Am I okay at being in the same denomination of him?
Yeah.
There's some people who draw that line in other places, and they're going to go and they'll maybe start a new, more, traditionally reformed denomination of their own, and that's okay. And then there's people on the other side who are just like, look, I can't stand to be with a bunch of stupid fundies.
Yeah.
I'm going to leave and I'm going to go be on a more progressive denomination.
Right.
I think you'll continue to see that split happen.
Yeah.
Because I don't think happens is, I don't think we come back more toward some sort of a centrist, more middle position. Because I don't think that exists.
Right.
And I think with the way that social media is today, it's really easy to know what the church down the street from you believes, teaches, and confesses.
Yep.
That used to be pretty hard to do. You'd actually have to go down there.
You have to look up the phone book.
Yeah.
Go call the pastor if you got him. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's a lot more fluidity now too.
Yeah.
People will hear our pastor preach.
Yeah.
And they'll know, oh, that's the sort of PCA church I want to go to.
Yeah.
And they'll come to it.
Right.
And the same thing happens the other way. People will show up and they, during COVID, they saw we weren't wearing masks. So they went to another PCA church where everyone was wearing masks. So it's a sorting that I think is going to happen. Yeah. But I don't see any major exoduses at this point.
Well, I'm excited. I'm excited for next PCA. I'm excited to see some of the pastors start to fight, start to engage. Some of the ruling elders start to engage. It's definitely been something that I've been following this last couple of years. So thanks, Scott. Thanks for coming to the studio.
Yeah, thanks, Gabe.
Thank you guys for tuning in. Our live show drops here at 6 o'clock. Make sure you guys catch that show. We talked about all sorts of good stuff. Enjoy.